Hello, my name is Lee Presser. This is my show. I speak frequently to very interesting people. Some of these conversations are so exciting, so intellectually stimulating, I thought others might like to listen in. This is the reason we started recording Conversation with Lee Presser.
Welcome to Conversation with Lee Presser. In July 1944, at the end of World War II, when it was in sight, 730 delegates from 44 Allied nations met for 3 weeks negotiating a post-war economic framework. These negotiations were held at the Mount Washington Hotel in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire. The conference established a system of rules and institutions and procedures to regulate the international monetary system. The chief features of the Bretton Woods system were the creation of an exchange rate of tying various currencies to the US dollar and creating an ability of the IMF to bridge temporary imbalances of payments. Our guest today is Dr. Ayse Evrensel. Dr. Evrensel is an associate professor of economics with the Department of Economics and Finance at Southern Illinois University, Edwardsville. She has published articles about the Bretton Woods and post-Bretton Woods exchange rate regime, the effectiveness of the IMF stabilization programs in developing countries, and the effects of financial markets. Dr. Evrensel, welcome to Conversation.
Good to be here, Lee.
Did I get any of that right?
Oh, yes, everything was very correct.
Good, good. So I've been interested in this ever since I read about the Bretton Woods conference. And by the way, as a sidebar, I didn't know it at the time. A few years ago, we actually went to Mount Washington, and there's a drive, you can drive all the way up to the top there. And so we were right there, you know, and then later on, you know, it was like, oh wow, that's where the Bretton Woods conference was. Now, most people never knew anything about this. Some of the techs around here, when I told them that they were going to be talking about this subject today, actually went out and read about it because they'd never heard of it either. But why don't you just give a basic history of what Bretton Woods was, why it was, and what the problem was before the war and during the war that caused these 730 delegates to come together.
Mm-hmm. I think that we need to look at Bretton Woods in the context of history that started during the pre-World War I era.
Okay.
Let's start with that, because the problems, the fundamental problems of an international monetary system, such as the gold standard, goes back to 1800s. So the United Kingdom, or at that time Britain, was the first to institute gold standard in any formal format in 1819. And problems started, and some other countries at that time, powerful countries, also adopted gold standard. And but problems started very early. Even during that time.
And what was the problem?
The problem was that, you know, when you have a metallic standard, the gold standard or any other precious metal, if your money is based on that, then you are facing sort of a trilemma. It is called the trilemma. Trilemma means that under a metallic standard, you want to have a stability in your exchange rates,
mm-hmm.
You know, exchange rate
being
stability.
able to trade with other nations.
Right, and then, but at the same time, you want to conduct independent monetary policy so that you can address the problems of the country. Mm-hmm. And thirdly, you want capital flows between countries. Sort of free capital flows between countries. And the trilemma in international finance is that you cannot really do those things altogether. You can have two of them, but then not the other one. Say you want exchange rate stability, and you also want to address your country's domestic macroeconomic problems. So you want to have an independent monetary policy. That will be very difficult. To achieve those two goals would be very difficult if you keep international capital flows free. And pretty much the problem has always been that in the history of the gold standard, starting in 1819 in Britain. So what countries do when they are in trouble, this was true during the pre-World War I era, it was true during the sort of pre-World War II era, and that was also true during the Bretton Woods era, that in order to maintain exchange rate stability, countries actually got involved in contractionary monetary policies. A contractionary monetary policy means that the country wants to avoid outflow of funds, therefore decrease the money supply, keep the interest rates high in order, this is an attempt to get the funds, to keep the funds in the country. And so that's why you might hear, you may have heard about this, many prominent economists talked about deflationary policies as the main culprit for the Great Depression. Certainly the previous Fed chairman, Mr. Greenspan, talked about it. Mr. Bernanke, the current Fed chairman, in his book, A Great Depression, talked about this deflationary vortex.
Isn't that happening now? There's a certain amount of deflation that's going on? Prices are beginning to fall?
Yes, but not because of monetary policy. That's the reason.
Oh.
You know, the reason is important for inflation, for deflation, for larger changes in the price level, or for any changes. Reasons are important. But at that time, during any metallic, under any metallic standard, the reason was not to lose funds to other countries with higher interest rates. Because the exchange rates are fixed, so
because you don't want all your money leaving the country.
That's right. That's right. You don't want to do that.
Well, during this pre-World War I period you're talking about, did countries have that problem?
Oh yes, it started very early. Actually, it started very early, let me say, with even at that time, sort of mid-19th century, the international capital markets, financial markets were coming together. So when there is integration, there will be a lot of flows. And so as countries approached, especially in Europe, especially Britain, as countries approached the 1914, sort of World War I, the contractionary policies were already in place. And of course, even though people may look at metallic standards like a gold standard as a stable international monetary system, they are not, because in the history of the world, you always have to get off the standard when there is a war, or there is a revolution, or there is a civil war. It always happened like that. So why? Because under the gold standard, you have no control over your monetary policy, pretty much. Meaning, it will be very difficult to increase the money supply to address, say, a slowdown in the economy.
So here we go through World War I. Countries are ruined, like Germany.
Right.
And then they lose total control of their currency. It completely debases. We wound up going just into, well, of course, then Hitler and the Hitler regime comes along. They stabilize their monetary policy there. What's going on in the rest of Europe at this time? Well, did they stabilize?
No, not at all. So we are talking about the sort of pre-World War II era now, where toward the end it was the Great Depression, pretty much.
Right.
Severe depression in some countries, but Great Depression in some other countries. Now, after World War I, again, Britain first, they went back to the gold standard. However, in other countries followed Britain. However, this deflationary vortex started again. Countries always want to hold on to this exchange rate stability, and when you do that, and when funds are free to float between countries, then all you want to do is to prevent that flow. And again, in order to keep the domestic interest rates higher, countries were engaged in deflationary policies or implemented contractionary monetary policies. It happened in the United States, it happened in other countries in Europe, it happened in Britain. There was one difference though, and the difference was when, I believe it was mid-1930s when British pound was attacked. Attacking means that investors in financial markets understand that British pound is overvalued. So what they do, because a British pound, there was the gold standard, and British pound it's convertible into gold. Investors wanted to get rid of their British pounds in return for gold. And at that point, of course, the central bank, any central bank, would lose its gold reserves. And that's a run on the currency. Now that started, when it started in Britain, Britain went off the gold standard. The mistake that the United States made was, we did not. We wanted to hold on to the gold standard. We wanted to hold on to contractionary monetary policies, which were named as the main reasons for Great Depression in this country by many economists.
So you're talking about in the period immediately after the war?
This is World War I, going into the Great Depression. And it's at the same time, see, we are talking about like 1930. I mean, think about this. Think about Smoot-Hawley. Why all of a sudden the United States started implementing these very harsh import restrictions? You can now, under normal circumstances, trade is affected by exchange rates. But then you can turn the table around and you can make trade affecting exchange rates. So suppose at that time in the United States is trying to hold on to the gold parity and also trying to not to lose any funds to other countries, therefore tries to keep higher interest rates. And at the same time, what can you do in terms of trade so that you can be helped in this effort? Well, you can impose trade restrictions.
Well, that didn't work out very well, did it?
No, it did not. No. And I mean, one of the reasons very apparent in international trade, when you start imposing trade restrictions, other countries will retaliate. They're not going to sit around and look at you, cutting off their exports to you. So then we went into a deflationary war, or war of contractionary monetary policies, but also sort of a trade wars, which was not good for anybody. But it was important to realize that countries such as Britain, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, when they went off the standard early enough, they experienced a recession, fairly severe recession. But we remained on the gold standard. We wanted to hold on to it, and we had this. We experienced Great Depression along with some other European countries.
So this sets up World War II, and of course, World War II disrupts the entire economic system. So here we are now. Finally, it looks like the Allies are going to win. This is 44 July. That means D-Day is already passed. It looks pretty good, like the Allies are going to win World War II. So these 730 delegates from 44 countries wind up in the United States to talk about what?
To talk about how to restructure the international monetary system. after the war. When you look at the Bretton Woods, and especially when you look at the institutions that were created by the Bretton Woods, you understand that the leaders of the world at that time, Britain and the United States, understood what went wrong in previous periods. When you look at these three institutions that were created by Bretton Woods, the GATT, the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, that was against, of course, any trade restrictions. So world trade should be free in the, in the post-World War II era, and that was certainly an indication that the adverse effects of trade restrictions during the Great Depression, from the prior era that was understood.
They kind of learned a lesson.
They learned a lesson. Certainly, it shows that. When you look at the IBRD, International Bank for Reconstruction and Development, pretty much World Bank today, that bank was introduced to help the reconstruction efforts in allied countries, not only in allied countries, but also in the aggressor countries. Now, what does that tell you? That tells you that the reparation payments that were imposed after World War I on Germany were very hurtful.
It was a bad idea.
It was a bad idea. It led to hyperinflation in Germany and arguably to the rise of the Nazis. So
now, what was the value of having these various currencies of allied nations tied to the American dollar?
Oh, well, that is an interesting question, and then we can talk about the IMF, because that was the third institution. When people talk about the gold standard, it's sort of in their minds it's gold standard. There are different variations in gold standard. The type of gold standard that we have during the pre-World War I and in between the World Wars era, that was gold standard in a way that each country defined its currency, or each country defined the parity between its currency and the gold. And gold price, or they express the value of their currency in terms of gold. Now, the Bretton Woods Conference introduced the reserve currency idea, which means it's different, because the reserve currency, or the reserve country that has this currency, of course, at that time, the strongest country, the United States, the dollar. So the reserve country pegged its money to the dollar, and all other countries pegged their currencies to the dollar. In that kind of a system, the reserve country keeps gold reserves, and then other countries that peg their currency to the dollar, they keep dollar as reserves. Reserve currency.
Instead of gold.
Instead of gold.
Right.
If they wanted, they could, and they did some gold, but it wasn't necessary. So
this was a substitute for the old gold standard.
That's right.
The American dollar system.
Yes, it is a variation of gold standard. Now, this is an interesting thing, though. I mean, in economics, everything is costly. Every decision has costs and benefits. Of course, that decision was good for the United States, because in a reserve country, as the reserve country, you have a lot more freedom in terms of your monetary policy.
And money started pouring into the United States as a result.
Well, it went probably the other way around. But that was important. But the other countries that pegged their currency to the U.S. dollar were not that free. So they had to, in that kind of a system, the United States can, if it wants to, can say inflate the economy a little. Of course, it cannot do it too much because that would lead to a devaluation of the US dollar. That would increase the price of US dollar. But in some way, it can tweak it, and all other countries that use the US dollar as reserve currency, they just have to take the monetary policy of the United States and then do the same thing. Why? Because otherwise, say, United States inflates the economy under this reserve currency standard, and then interest rates in the United States will fall. Of course, then funds will flow to other countries in the system, but that would mean that their currency would appreciate. Well, that cannot be happening under this metallic standard or under this variation of the metallic standard. And therefore, what they did the same thing what they would do, hypothetically. They would also follow an expansionary monetary policy and keep the interest rates low. So this is an important thing. I think this is an important point to realize that, because some people think that that era was wonderful for the United States. But you know what? It cannot be done right now because no country in the world would go along with that. Would go along with, the reserve country can do whatever it wants to, and then we just follow the reserve country in its monetary policy.
Absolutely. I mean, I understand what you're saying because, I mean, here, the United States, because it was in the driver's seat, because the rest of the world, the advanced world was in a state of wreck because of World War II, we were virtually untouched by the war and had the factory system, still had a money system that worked. So they were depending upon the United States, and they all said, "Uncle, okay, fine, we'll work with the United States," which was good in the long run for America from about 1944 to about 1972. But starting around 1972, 73, when we went off the gold standard, then Bretton Woods basically broke down. As I understand it, you would know more. Before we forget, you wanted to cover the IMF issue as well.
Yes, the third organization that was introduced by the Bretton Woods Conference was the International Monetary Fund. And of course, why? First of all, again, previous experience sort of indicated that somebody has to organize the system. The flaws of the previous gold standards, one of the flaws was that countries would engage unilaterally some monetary policies, which at the end led to deflationary vortex. And so that was to be avoided, rightly so. And the International Monetary Union was introduced so that, as you said in introduction, to oversee orderly changes in the exchange rates without pushing countries into wrong type of monetary policies. And of course, it is interesting in terms of economic history. Keynes, as the representative of Britain, had a different plan. He was thinking about an international organization, but an organization, a sort of a clearing union that has a lot more power, that would punish both current account surplus and current account deficit countries, that would have its own currency. But the American plan is named as the White Plan, after Harry Dexter White. And but the White Plan said, no, it's sort of an international. Actually, it was like first international stabilization fund, something that would just oversee the orderly changes in the exchange rate. And the IMF was set out to achieve this goal through various schemes. So one, quotas. So IMF was conceived as an institution where to which countries pay subscription fees. And the quotas were to be paid 70% with the member countries' own currency and 25% gold and reserve currency, the dollar. So that set up the IMF as an organization with its own money, a pool of money, where if they were to some, current account deficits or surplus would appear, and then at that time, of course, if that happens, then countries had to change the exchange rate. Of course, we wouldn't want that. So in order to keep the exchange rate as stable as possible, then for example, the IMF would provide funds to current account deficit countries.
I see. Just so you're aware, we got about like 3 minutes or so
really?
left. Time just goes by here. So just so you're aware, we're going to have to make sure that we come to some wrap-up conclusion here soon. So in terms of Bretton Woods and the conference itself and the outcome, positive, negative, or just a short-term fix for a longer world problem?
It was a short-term fix for that time. I'm saying this for the reason you view the sort of the strong period of the United States in Bretton Woods, 1944 to 1973. I wouldn't say that. In 1947, problems started, and that's where Marshall Plan came in. Mm-hmm. I mean, the United States was providing so much fund for reconstruction via the IBRD. It wasn't enough. And so the United States had to actually provide those funds. And the problem started in 1950 when the United States started running large current account deficits. And from then on, everything went down. That's the reason why in 1958, for example, the Eisenhower administration started introducing, again, unfortunately, import restrictions. The Kennedy administration in 1963 took a better way, I think. They wanted to introduce tax cuts in order to increase the productivity of the United States. Why were these efforts? Because again, the United States, the dollar became overvalued. But still, the parity was, $35 per ounce of gold. In 1964, 63 probably, and probably after that, 1967, twice British pound was attacked. There was a run on the British pound for the same reason we talked before. In 1961, I believe 8 countries came together to build a pool, a gold pool. The most important price of gold is the gold fix, morning fix in London. Mm-hmm. So these 8 countries came together and they started selling gold in the market in order to keep the price of gold. Can you imagine? You have a currency such as the dollar is based on gold, $35 per troy ounce, but then the free market price of gold is increasing. You need to let the currency devalue, but they didn't.
We're going to have to leave it there. I'm sorry.
That's fine. Thank you.
Time goes by, and I very much appreciate your coming and spending some time with us today and lending us your expertise on this very technical subject. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
And to my audience, I've been speaking with Ayse Evrensel. She is a professor at Southern Illinois University in the Economics and Finance Department. Hopefully you enjoyed this conversation, and you can find this also on YouTube. Thanks. See you next time.